It's possible to divorce after a big bang of a fight. There are other ways to do it, like in a very soft way, when you discover that the person you love leads a completely different life. I did it quietly in Chicago, although at that time I did not realize it yet. The morning my daughter suggested that we go. When my husband was going on a business trip to Chicago, our daughter said, "Let's go to surprise Dad." So we booked flights. But when we reached that hotel, and the clerk at the reception looked up from her computer with a puzzled frown, something froze inside me even before I understood why. My name is Lily Cooper. I am 43 years old, and until that weekend, I thought that I more or less understood my life. I live in a suburban town outside Richmond, Virginia, in a brick colonial house with a maple tree that paints my whole front yard in orange every October. I work as the office manager and bookkeeper at a dental practice, a job I hold for 11 years, the one I love due to my particular passion for columns that make my schedule work smoothly. My husband Mason is 48 years old, and he is a regional sales director in a medical device company, the kind of job that requires a man to wear a suit and be charming enough to make a hospital administrator feel himself the most important person in the room. We have been married for 18 years. I won't pretend that our marriage is as passionate as it used to be 18 years ago. Neither can any marriage be. The romance fades and turns into something else. Grocery lists, a hand on my back while we watched evening news. The peculiar comfort of knowing how someone likes his coffee. At that time, I believed that steadiness is more valuable than fireworks. Actually, I believe it now. I just didn't know that at that time that Mason and I stopped sharing what it means to be steady. During the last 6 months, his travel became more frequent. Client meetings, regional conferences, and FaceTime with hospital procurement teams. Reasonable explanations for all of them, given in his usual calm and confident manner. This particular trip to Chicago, he assured me, was more important than others since there was a big contract hanging above it. He told me the name of the hotel where he was staying and the conference schedule without me asking. Those details are volunteered by men when they have nothing to hide. When I proposed a video conference once, he waved it off. There was no place for that in that particular hotel. It was crowded there, and days were long. He preferred to talk on the phone when he could. There was nothing special in it for me. Why would there be? Our 13-year-old daughter Chloe missed him more than she let us know. She was fast and affectionate and fiercely attached to her father in a peculiar way daughters are. And lately the house became a bit empty with him constantly traveling. One Saturday morning during the breakfast, she looked up from her plate with an expression that I immediately recognized. She was determined to say something, and she needed only some time to gather courage. "Mom," she said, "what if we went to Chicago and surprised Dad?" At first I was just laughing, but then I looked at her waffle syrup on her chin and those bright eyes full of ideas, and I felt something melting inside of me. Guilt, maybe. We haven't traveled together as a family lately, and I was convinced that this trip would help us remember our ties to each other. I asked Friday off work. I booked 2 tickets and a room at the same hotel Mason mentioned. Chloe spent an hour that evening preparing a card, with her tongue stuck between her teeth in concentration. When she showed me the result of her work, it read, "We missed you too much to stay home." I called Mason that night and told him that Chloe and I would be busy over the weekend. A lie to prevent him from calling during our flight. He didn't ask any questions. On the contrary, if anything, he sounded relieved in a way I did not analyze. "Good," he said. "Maybe you two should have a girls' weekend." I will remember that sentence precisely since later I would replay it 100 times, trying to detect the crack in it. That night, Chloe could not fall asleep in anticipation. She came into our room in her pajamas with her hair in a loose braid and climbed onto the edge of my bed, the way she used to do when she was little. "Do you think Dad will cry when he sees us?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, smoothing her hair from her forehead, "but in a good way." She smiled and went to bed, and I lay awake for a long time dreaming about the expression on Mason's face when he opens that door. Surprise, then joy, then that peculiar warm feeling that he always had for our daughter. I spent the whole night imagining his happiness. I didn't know that when Mason saw us standing there in Chicago, what would come on his face would not be joy at all, it would be fear. We were up before the sunrise, the alarm sounding at 4:30 in the morning in the dark house that was still cold. Chloe was already up when I knocked on her door, putting on the gray hoodie that Mason bought her for Christmas, with a little embroidered fox on the sleeve. She chose it on purpose. Maybe her instinct whispered that it would mean something to him to see her wearing it. The drive to the airport was quiet, rain tapping on the windshield lightly. The highway was nearly empty, except for the rare pair of car headlights floating in the opposite direction. Chloe was sitting at the window with the card in her lap, checking every minute if the corners were not bending. "Do you think it'll get crushed?" she asked. And I told her that I would wrap it in a plastic sleeve in the airport if she wanted it. It seemed to satisfy her. The security check took longer than expected. We were standing in a long queue under the fluorescent light, with Chloe worrying aloud if her snow boots would be considered bulky footwear, and by the time we got to the gates we had enough time only to grab a coffee and a waffle from a kiosk near the gates. She was talking all the way through while we were eating. How she wanted to knock on the door herself. How I should stand off so that Mason wouldn't see me first. How the two of us would count to 3 and yell surprise together. I watched her animated hands while she was explaining the plan, and I realized clearly and simply that I did the right thing. That everything I felt somehow hollow during the past months, that this weekend would bring us together. I sent Mason a text before boarding. "Hope your presentation goes well. We love you." The answer came almost instantly. Going into meetings, the phone might be off all day. Some strange feeling caught my attention for a brief second. He told me the night before that the presentation was supposed to take place yesterday, not today, but I shrugged. Conference schedules change. I worked in enough offices to know that the plans change in an hour. As we were taxiing to the runway, another message popped up. "Don't wait up tonight. Client dinner." I felt just faintly that he was trying to clear the schedule in advance, to make sure that I wouldn't call him unavailable. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, and I put my phone in the airplane mode, watching Chloe pull the window shade so that she wouldn't see her nervousness about the takeoff. Chicago met us with a sharp, bright, cold wind coming from the lake and piercing my coat as if it was not there. Chloe was pressing her face to the train window as the skyline was rising from the flat gray horizon, all glass and steel. And for a moment, I let myself enjoy it too. The excitement of getting somewhere new, somewhere where our family didn't travel yet. We took the train to the city center, then a short walk to the hotel that Mason mentioned, an elegant business tower near the river, with a revolving door and a lobby smelling of cedar and fresh flowers. We checked in our room first. Chloe wanted to run up to her father's floor, tugging at my sleeve and vibrating with anticipation. But I told her that we need to make sure that his room number is correct before going into the hallways of that hotel. I approached the reception and explained to the clerk smilingly that we want to surprise my husband, Mason Cooper, who is participating in the medical sales conference there. The young woman at the reception started typing something, frowned, and typed again. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't have a guest under that name." I told her that the reservation was probably done under the company name, and she checked it again, scrolling through what must have been a conference block list. Then she looked up at me, trying to be gentle. "The medical sales conference is over yesterday afternoon." I stood there for a second without saying anything. Mason had told me that the conference lasted till Sunday. I remember the peculiar sensation of those words not fitting into my knowledge, like a piece of the puzzle put into the wrong slot. I tried to think of the explanation, an extension, a separate event, something. Chloe was standing in a few steps away in the seating area, still holding the card to her chest, oblivious, waiting for her father, the way you wait for the parade to start. I called Mason. It went straight to voicemail. I was standing at that reception counter, trying to figure out how it could happen when Chloe suddenly jumped up and pointed through the tall windows to the street. "Mom, isn't that Dad?" I turned around. Through the gray light of the afternoon, across the street, a man in a familiar brown coat was walking towards the glass doors of a service apartment building, the one with clean lines and discreet awnings. I would recognize him anywhere. 18 years of seeing a man cross a room gives you an idea of his shape. It's not just his appearance, it's also how he carries himself, even though you haven't seen it in a while. Even though you see him through glass, even though it's not your city anymore. But he wasn't moving alone. He had a woman with his arm wrapped around her, laughing at something he had said. Her head was tipped towards his shoulder in such a way that my stomach turned before my brain even got the picture. I moved fast, placing myself between Chloe and the window, mumbling some stuff about how the light had played tricks on me, how it definitely wasn't him. But I knew from the coat, the brown woolen coat he had bought 2 winters ago in the outlet mall with my help, constantly complaining about the prices. I knew from his posture, slightly bending forwards as if he were always entering a meeting he needed to win. I knew from the leather bag he was holding, the one I had presented him with on his 45th birthday, with his initials stitched into the strap. Chloe wanted to go across the street and ask the guy why we weren't saying hello, but I told her we needed to get settled in first, unload our luggage, give Dad some time to finish what he had been doing. I needed several minutes for myself to figure out what I had seen. At our hotel room, I called Mason once again, and for the second time today, he replied with a text instead of a call. "Still in meetings. Can't talk." I looked at those words, knowing they had been sent not long after I saw him leave through a pair of glass doors with the woman hanging onto his arm. I saw no more space for doubts, no gentler interpretation I could squeeze into the facts. And I told Chloe to stay in the room and watch something on TV while I sorted out an issue with Dad's reservation. She agreed somewhat disappointedly, starting to reach for the remote control, and I walked down the corridor, feeling as if I were walking in a thick liquid. I crossed the street, entering a little cafe near the apartment building. I didn't plan to drink anything. I ordered a cup of coffee and just sat down in the corner of the cafe, watching the elevator bank at the entrance of the building. 20 minutes had passed when the elevator doors opened and Mason exited the building with the same woman. Both of them dressed for dinner. Now the woman wore a black fitted dress, and Mason wore a navy jacket I had personally steamed for him before his departure. That wasn't two colleagues finishing a meeting. That was something else, something built with rhythm and practice. Something with ease that can be gained only with repetitions. He had placed his hand at the small of her back as they started to walk towards the door, and she turned towards him, kissing his cheek lightly and familiarly, and saying something I was not supposed to overhear but did anyway. Her voice reached my ears faintly in the silent hall. "Once the divorce is final, we won't have to keep doing this." I stood up and moved towards them as soon as I had processed that sentence. I called his name. "Mason." He turned around and I saw his face doing something I would never forget. The relaxed, practiced ease fell off instantly, and I saw something close to pure panic on his face. And the woman between us was confused, her smile faltering. "What are you doing in Chicago?" Mason asked, as if he were the one who owed me an explanation. "My daughter wanted to surprise you," I replied. His face became the color of the sidewalk. The woman looked at me properly now, taking in my coat and my face, looking for something I couldn't identify. "Your daughter?" she asked. "I'm Lily Cooper," I said, "his wife." I saw those words landing on her like something physical. Her arm slowly fell from his sleeve. She introduced herself. "Claire," she said, though I barely registered it in those moments. I could easily see that she was as surprised as me, though from another point of view. Over the course of several minutes, in short and disbelieving phrases, I got an idea of the story Mason had created. Claire had believed they had been separated for nearly a year, living in separate houses, with the divorce papers signed, and simply needing a signature of a judge. Mason had even showed her a photo of those documents, spread across the kitchen table he presumed his own. I had never seen those papers. I had never signed anything. Claire's expression changed from surprise to something colder as well. She wasn't just being lied about the state of our marriage. She was being made complicit in that fabrication unknowingly for several months. Mason tried to say something about a complicated misunderstanding, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "How long have you been telling people our marriage was over?" I asked him. He had nothing to say, neither did he have an answer to that. Or if he did, he wasn't brave enough to pronounce it in the lobby in front of two women who had believed in the truth he had invented for his convenience. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Chloe, 13 years old, still holding a homemade card, patiently waiting on the fourth floor of her existence. "Mom, when can we surprise Dad?" I looked at Mason, standing before me with guilt written across the face I had known for 20 years, and realized in the split second that the hardest thing about that day was not what I had seen. It was returning to my little girl who would believe her father was crying happy tears seeing her. Before I returned to Chloe, I turned towards Mason one more time. I whispered quietly without drama that she hadn't seen anything. Not the woman, not the apartment building, none of it. And that he was not to come to our room until I figured out how to explain her what had happened. He attempted to follow me, but I stopped him at the hotel's revolving door. "You had months to explain," I said. "You chose to lie instead." He didn't follow me further. Upstairs, Chloe was sitting cross-legged on the bed with the card in her lap, watching a cartoon with the volume turned down. She looked at me when I entered, and I saw her face changing immediately, trying to interpret me like children do without any words. She asked me why we weren't going to visit Dad's hotel room. I told her his plans had changed because of work. He was staying somewhere else nearby. It wasn't a total lie, but it wasn't the truth either, and I hated the fact that I was the kind of mother who had to choose which one to give her. "Did Dad do something bad?" she asked. And there was no hiding from the directness of that question, the way only children are capable of. "Your father made choices that hurt our family. I'm still trying to understand them myself." Around an hour later, there was a knock on the door. Chloe rushed to it faster than I could stop her, but she froze when she saw both of our faces, mine, carefully composed, and his, raw and uncertain, the way I had rarely seen it before. She still gave him the card, though, and he slowly unfolded it, reading the words she had written in careful, looping handwriting. "We missed you too much to stay home." I watched something breaking in him. He wasn't pretending. For the first time today, I believed in the emotions I saw on his face. It was the beginning of the realization of the price of his choices. Chloe asked why he had told us he was in meetings when he wasn't at the conference at all. Mason was unable to find an answer. He was staring at her with the same directness only a 13-year-old could give him. "You told me lying is what people do when they are afraid of the truth," she said. He had nothing to say to that. Neither did I. Later that evening, when Mason left and Chloe fell asleep with the TV still murmuring quietly, my phone lit up with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Claire. She found my contact information somewhere, social media, or an old business card Mason had left in his drawer, and she wanted to tell me everything. I almost didn't reply to that message, but I felt it necessary to know exactly what I was dealing with. So I listened. And during an hour, in a series of messages, Claire told me about 9 months of a relationship, built on the story Mason had invented so carefully. He told her we were separated for almost a year. He said he had been staying in the Chicago apartment on business trips. Since then, he had been slowly building a life there, waiting for a permanent move after the divorce is finalized. She forwarded me the screenshots of their conversations. He wrote plainly, Lily already signed. I'm just waiting for the court date. In another message, he explained he had used the money from his share of assets to pay for the apartment they were living together partially for several months. I sat on the bathroom sink after reading that, the door closed so Chloe wouldn't wake up, and opened our banking app, having somewhat shaky hands. Our joint savings account looked pretty normal, but the investment account, the one Mason had been managing, the one I had trusted him with because I never liked dealing with numbers, and Mason enjoyed doing it, had been steadily losing money for 6 months. Small transfers, easy to overlook if you're not paying attention. Small transfers, easy to overlook if you're not paying attention. I never checked, because he managed investments. I never time. Looking at glowing phone, making the calculations that didn't involve numbers, counting months, meetings, missed video calls. All of the little things I had accepted as truth from the man giving me those excuses. Because I trusted the man when Mason finally texted me about talking in the morning, I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I watched Chloe sleeping peacefully, her one arm flung over the blanket, still in the fox hoodie she picked that morning to make her father happy. That night, I started working on the question that would be soon asked to him. Was Claire the only secret you kept from me? Somehow, I already knew it would be complicated. Chicago not only uncovered a hidden affair, but revealed something greater, something that Mason had been building brick by brick for many months, while I was back home in Richmond, believing every word of him. We changed our flights, flew home next morning. Mason stayed in Chicago, explaining that he had to sort out everything related to work, but I realized that in reality he simply was afraid to fly with us in one plane. This flight home was totally different from the previous one. Chloe remained silent. Her card was folded into her backpack and most of the flight was spent staring through the clouds. I didn't know what to tell her about leaving of her father, whether this was her fault because she suggested that trip. I promised to her with all the confidence I could show that whatever happened between me and her father, she will not be abandoned, and I mean it. I still mean it. Once we arrived at home, I did not cry in front of her, and I did not fall apart the way I wanted to. Instead, I did something unexpected even for myself. I became organized. I backed up every bank statement I found. I took pictures of our tax returns, mortgage, our house deed. I changed passwords to my personal accounts and saved copies of our passports, birth certificates, and other relevant information somewhere where Mason would not think to look. I did not close any joint accounts. I did not destroy anything belonging to him. I did not publish anything online. Somewhere deep inside, I realized that how I would handle everything would matter for divorce, as well as for the person I would have to look at in the mirror. I found Rachel Moreno, a divorce attorney through my coworker who had experienced a tough divorce 2 years ago. Rachel was amazingly calm, what I needed at that time. She advised me not to confront Mason before we would secure our financial situation. Money flows in the marriage, she explained. Money that we received and spent during the marriage are still considered to be property, and they don't depend on the account owner's name. She recommended finding a forensic accountant. She told me that if Mason had used our joint funds to support his relationship outside our marriage, then the spending would be added to the calculation of the assets division. She advised me not to block Mason from seeing Chloe, unless there was a safety issue, because punishing him through our daughter would cost her more than him. At this point of rawness, I admitted to Rachel that some part of me wanted him to lose everything. Rachel looked at me with a calm gaze and said something that stays with me till today. Your goal is not to destroy him. Your goal is to keep him from destroying what remains. Forensic accountant confirmed my assumption and added some unexpected facts. Nearly $78,000 were withdrawn from our joint investment account and put to accounts controlled by Mason only. Some of these funds were used to pay for the apartment in Chicago, some for jewelry and weekend trips to Chicago, and also there was the payment for a deposit that would provide an apartment for permanent residence. Even worse, some of these trips were charged in his company as business travel. Also, there was one folder in our cloud storage that I forgot to exist. In this folder, there was a draft of a separation agreement that Mason had been preparing secretly. In this agreement, he stated that he would let me to keep the house but pay the mortgage myself. He intended to keep the biggest part of his retirement account. He was planning to move to Chicago. Chloe was supposed to visit him twice a year on selected holidays, as if she is just another person in his life. Mason returned home 3 days later, probably counting on tears or shouting or begging me to stay. Instead, he found the financial documents spread on the kitchen table. When he glanced at them, he tried to say that the money is a personal bonus. I said that the money first flowed to our joint account and only then he secretly transferred it to other account. He accused me of violation of his privacy, saying that I invaded his privacy. Privacy means closing the bathroom door, I said. This was deception. He could not think of anything to respond to this phrase. Several days later, Rachel officially informed Mason that I filed for divorce and requested a temporary protection of our joint assets. He read the letter standing in our kitchen, the kitchen in which we had thousands of dinners together over 18 years, and looked at me with disbelief. Are you really going to end 18 years of marriage because of one mistake? he asked me. I thought about Chicago, the hotel lobby apartment. I thought about Claire, whose arm was looped with his in draft agreement, which was hidden in the folder of our wedding photos. I thought about every excuse that I accepted without hesitation because I believed the man. Chicago was not one mistake, I answered. This is where I finally saw all the choices you have already made. I saw the disappointment in his eyes, not the acceptance, but the first crack in the story that he has been telling to himself. On the porch, the light was turned on automatically with the dusk timer. The timer that Mason had installed years ago, in the times when installing things for our house was a proof of his love rather than habit left after it. Mason moved to rented apartment in town, to one of those beige buildings with a pool that no one uses in winter. For the first few weeks, Chloe refused to see him. I never tried to force her to forgive him, but I encouraged her to talk to someone. Rachel recommended a family therapist, a woman called Dr. Patel, who specializes in adolescents dealing with a divorce. Mason sends Chloe text messages every day. She reads these messages and does not answer most of them. I had my own life to lead in the meanwhile. There were bills that didn't care about my heartbreak, job where I had to be at 8 every morning, and daughter whose schedule did not stop because of this. The neighbors asked me cautiously where Mason was. I gave them short and unremarkable answers. I was not interested in turning our street into an audience. Claire, in her turn, gave everything that she had to Rachel. Text messages, apartment receipts, photos, and even a doctored image of divorce papers that Mason showed her to prove that our marriage had already broken up. She cut off all the contact with him. When she contacted me to apologize, I did not feel much anger towards her at that point. You believe the same man I did. I explained to her the differences of the beliefs I believed him for 18 years. Finally, Mason's company noticed a pattern in his expense reports. Personal trips to Chicago had been logged as client visits, hotel charges not matching any client meeting in his calendar. There was no dramatic arrest. No handcuffs, nothing worthy of a television show. Mason was suspended pending an internal investigation, required to return the misused funds, and stripped of his management title. Instead of waiting for the outcome of investigation, he resigned. He accused me at first of the destruction of his career as if I had been the one who filed his expense reports. I reminded him that I did not contact his company, that his paperwork did it itself. The divorce settlement negotiations lasted for several months. Initially, Mason wanted to keep the biggest part of his retirement account and for me to sell the house outright, but the forensic accountant told a different story. Nearly $78,000 that were taken from our investment account and devoted to a life outside our marriage were counted as the part of his share of our assets rather than untouched bonus. In the final agreement, I kept the house provided I can refinance the mortgage in my name. The retirement accounts were divided according to the state guidelines. Mason agreed to contribute to Chloe's therapy and future school expenses. The custody was established in the interest of stability for Chloe and not for convenience of any of us. There was no dramatic moment in the courtroom, no slamming gavel, no scene worthy of a television show. The real weight of everything fell after the mediation session ended, and Mason and I were talking near the elevators of the unremarkable office building, both of us exhausted after several months of paperwork, lawyers, and guarded phone calls. I never meant to lose my family. He said that you did not lose us in Chicago. I answered that you spent 9 months building a life without us. He asked me quietly if I thought I could forgive him. I considered this question seriously before answering because I owe him at least this honesty even today. Forgiveness may come later, I said. Trust is not coming back. He nodded slowly as if he expected this answer and hated to hear it. There was nothing left to say. We descended in the elevator in silence. Two people who used to build an entire life out of small, ordinary days now dividing this life into folders and signatures. Outside, Chloe was waiting in the car, exactly where I told her to sit. She lowered the window as I drew closer, looking like 13-year-old children can sometimes look when they're really trying to act older, like they're waiting for some terrible news. Is it over? She asked. I got in, started the car, and left the heater rumble softly over the chill of late autumn. The marriage is over, I said, not our life. She studied me for a moment the way she'd studied my face back in that hotel room in Chicago and looked for the honest answer behind my words. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her, at least for now. And the woman between us was confused, her smile faltering. What are you doing in Chicago? Mason asked, as if he were the one who owed me an explanation. My daughter wanted to surprise you, I replied. His face became the color of the sidewalk. The woman looked at me properly now, taking in my coat and my face, looking for something I couldn't identify. Your daughter, she asked. I'm Lily Cooper, I said, his wife. I saw those words landing on her like something physical. Her arm slowly fell from his sleeve. She introduced herself. Claire, she said, though I barely registered it in those moments. I could easily see that she was as surprised as me, though from another point of view. Over the course of several minutes, in short and disbelieving phrases, I got an idea of the story Mason had created. Claire had believed they had been separated for nearly a year, living in separate houses, with the divorce papers signed, and simply needing a signature of a judge. Mason had even showed her a photo of those documents, spread across the kitchen table he presumed his own. I had never seen those papers. I had never signed anything. Claire's expression changed from surprise to something colder as well. She wasn't just being lied about the state of our marriage. She was being made complicit in that fabrication unknowingly for several months. Mason tried to say something about a complicated misunderstanding, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. How long have you been telling people our marriage was over? I asked him. He had nothing to say, neither did he have an answer to that. Or if he did, he wasn't brave enough to pronounce it in the lobby in front of two women who had believed in the truth he had invented for his convenience. The neighbors asked me cautiously where Mason was. I gave them short and unremarkable answers. I was not interested in turning our street into an audience. Claire, in her turn, gave everything that she had to Rachel. Text messages, apartment receipts, photos, and even a doctored image of divorce papers that Mason showed her to prove that our marriage had already broken up. She cut off all the contact with him. When she contacted me to apologize, I did not feel much anger towards her at that point. You believe the same man I did. I explained to her the differences of the beliefs I believed him for 18 years. Finally, Mason's company noticed a pattern in his expense reports. Personal trips to Chicago had been logged as client visits, hotel charges not matching any client meeting in his calendar. There was no dramatic arrest. No handcuffs, nothing worthy of a television show. Mason was suspended pending an internal investigation, required to return the misused funds and stripped of his management title. Instead of waiting for the outcome of investigation, he resigned. He accused me at first of the destruction of his career as if I had been the one who filed his expense reports. I reminded him that I did not contact his company, that his paperwork did it itself. The divorce settlement negotiations lasted for several months. Initially, Mason wanted to keep the biggest part of his retirement account and for me to sell the house outright, but the forensic accountant told a different story. Nearly $78,000 that were taken from our investment account and devoted to a life outside our marriage were counted as the part of his share of our assets rather than untouched bonus. In the final agreement, I kept the house provided I can refinance the mortgage in my name. The retirement accounts were divided according to the state guidelines. The neighbors asked me cautiously where Mason was. I gave them short and unremarkable answers. I was not interested in turning our street into an audience. Claire, in her turn, gave everything that she had to Rachel. Text messages, apartment receipts, photos, and even a doctored image of divorce papers that Mason showed her to prove that our marriage had already broken up. She cut off all the contact with him. When she contacted me to apologize, I did not feel much anger towards her at that point. You believe the same man I did. I explained to her the differences of the beliefs I believed him for 18 years. Finally, Mason's company noticed a pattern in his expense reports. Personal trips to Chicago had been logged as client visits, hotel charges not matching any client meeting in his calendar. There was no dramatic arrest. No handcuffs, nothing worthy of a television show. Mason was suspended pending an internal investigation, required to return the misused funds and stripped of his management title. Instead of waiting for the outcome of investigation, he resigned. He accused me at first of the destruction of his career as if I had been the one who filed his expense reports. I reminded him that I did not contact his company, that his paperwork did it itself. The divorce settlement negotiations lasted for several months. Initially, Mason wanted to keep the biggest part of his retirement account and for me to sell the house outright, but the forensic accountant told a different story. Nearly $78,000 that were taken from our investment account and devoted to a life outside our marriage were counted as the part of his share of our assets rather than untouched bonus. In the final agreement, I kept the house provided I can refinance the mortgage in my name. The retirement accounts were divided according to the state guidelines.